Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you liked today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Voice of Adoptees. Today we have Laki from Denmark. She also goes by Theodora for those who can't pronounce her first name correctly, but it is Laki from Denmark, and it is a pleasure to have her on the show, and we are very excited to hear her story and listen to her experience, and we are very honored to have her as a guest. Welcome so much, Laki. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us about who you are and a little about your journey, so about adoption.
Well, so I was adopted in Denmark, which is called same way as adoption, I guess. I never left Denmark, I later found out that I'm only 44% Danish, actually, which is quite funny. But so I was adopted here in Denmark in 1991. And I was adopted with one of my older brothers. And we grew up on the countryside in a very small town where everyone knew each other, and we didn't talk about adoption, and I think we were only like a handful of people being adopted in that city. And yeah, then I grew up, and it wasn't easy because my adoptive parents were like very self-absorbed, and they really lacked, the ability to reflect on their own behaviors and actions. And they really didn't meet our needs a lot. And I think for the most of my childhood and teenage period, I thought it was because of the adoption, I thought it was because I was adopted and because that they were unable to really imagine and, relate to me because they didn't experience being adopted as a kid. But it turned out it was a little bit more complex and a little bit more deeper than that. And that I don't think, to be honest, that they should ever have adopted any children or have any children in foster care as they also did. So I moved back to Copenhagen when I was around 19. I originally came from Copenhagen. I was born here. So I moved back to Copenhagen, I guess you can call it. And then I took my master degree in psychology and communication. And then I opened my own counseling company as a psychological and intuitive counselor, where my focus is on adoptees who seek recovering and healing. And also it has changed a little bit recently because many people have asked me who are non-adoptees, but they experience growing up with, abusive parents, with narcissistic abusive parents. And so apparently they could relate a lot to my work and my appearance on social media. And so they start reaching out to me and ask me if I can help them. So we'll see if I can.
That's very impressive. That is awesome that you have not only dedicated your life's work to, your foundations, but that you're willing to help anyone. I think that speaks volume. That's really, really impressive. So thank you for what you do. That's awesome. So on your website, you give a motto of "we walk each other home." What does this mean to you? And can you explain this a little bit?
I think that what I mean by "we walk each other home," that because I'm an adoptee myself, and because I grew up in a abusive adoptive family, it's like, I had to walk the path of healing and recover from what I have experienced, which was extremely painful. And then, I see myself helping other people come home to themselves and come home to their heart and their soul. So I think that's what I mean by we walk each other home, that I have written on my website.
I love that expression. It really does make you think.
Yeah, I borrowed it from someone. I gotta say that. It's not mine. I didn't come up with it. I borrowed it, but I really like it still. Yeah, yeah.
So you kind of start to talk about your work with adoptees in terms of the psychological background and therapy. Are there any additional work experiences that you have done in the past with adoptees and adoption? And more specifically, how did you get into that field? What made you want to go into being a psychologist to give back to adoptees?
I think it started when I was in the last year of my master degree, and I was like thinking about, so what now? What is going to happen after this? And I remember one day I was sitting at a cafe with a really good friend of mine, and we were like discussing what the topic should be for my master thesis. And I was like, first I was thinking, well, I think it should be something with like foster care children, blah blah blah, because that was what my adoptive parents had, tried to inspire me to write about. But then my good friend, who had known me for many, many years, she stopped me and she said, no, I don't think you should write about that, because that's your parents talking to you. I think you should write about what's most close to your heart. And then she said, you know what it is? And in that moment, I just realized it was adoption. But I think many adoptees can relate to this, that when we grow up in these very infected families where we have never created a language to articulate how it is to be adopted, how difficult it is, then it's like when we step out of that bubble, you know what I mean? Then we are like, whoa, I can do whatever I want to, and no one is gonna stop me. So in that day, I decided to write about adoption, what was significant for, I forgot what the word is, when it's same way as adoption, but it's when you are born in the same country and then adopted within the same country. I forgot the word for that.
Domestic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you're domestically adopted. So I chose to write about that. And it was funny because when I told my parents that, well, I changed my mind, I'm going to write about what's most close to my heart, they just suddenly had so many questions, and they kept saying that I was too inflicted, I was too involved in adoption personally, and therefore I couldn't write about it and being objective. And I just said, you know what, I think I'm just not going to discuss it with you any further. I just want to leave me alone and do my master thesis. And then I did that. And I think to write about it and to be so isolated for 6 months, and it was also when the second wave of COVID had hit Denmark, and the country had been shut down again by the prime minister. So I was so isolated with it, and I could just dive so deep into it as much as I wanted to. And I think in that period, it really opened up for me, like how complex adoption is, and how much we need a language to articulate what we have experienced and how it feels like, you know what I mean? And because my master degree was like a combination of psychology and communication, it made so much sense, to dive into the psychological aspect of how we use language, to heal and to understand ourselves, to understand our experiences, and to raise our awareness. So I think that was really what started all of it. And unfortunately, I had to pay very, very high price personally to be sitting here today and be working with adoptees and to talk about adoption on my social media platforms, because my whole adoptive family, they turned their back on me. So like beside of that, beside, showing up every day, working with adoptees and also people who experience narcissistic abuse, it's like I have to integrate that loss as well, at the same time, that I can't have the two things together. I can't have a relationship with my adoptive family and then do what my purpose. I can't live my purpose and still have my adoptive family. So that was the price I had to pay. And it is hard, and it's still hard. It truly is. But I think maybe, I don't know, some people, they tell me that maybe that's why I'm so good at what I'm doing,
Do you think over time your adoptive family will be able to come around and just accept the fact that, you do what you do for a living and you are passionate about what you do, and they can get past the adoption side and just go back to being family? Or do you think that's not an option?
I have hope for some family members, but there are some other family members where they never develop the ability to self-reflect, which is the foundation, to evolve, like in a relationship with each other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that ability, I don't know if people are able to develop it later on, but I think that when you have to deal with so much pain of being motherless and being fatherless, both with your biological parents and with your adoptive parents, you come to a point where, you need to ask yourself the hard questions about, will it help me where I want to move, where I want to, where I want to go? Will it help me that I hold on to the hope that maybe they will change, and maybe one day they will realize that it was not all my fault, and I was not a bad kid, and I was not too sensitive, I was not too dramatic, I was not requiring too much from them, I was not asking too much for them? Or will it set me free and give me the movement that I desperately need, if I let go of the hope and actually, face the illusion of the family that I never felt that I had. And I chose the last one because I don't have any more time to waste, So if I can choose what set me free, then that's what I'm gonna do.
Right.
Yeah, because I have already experienced, just the fact with being adopted. I already experienced not being asked, what do you want? And I think it really changes people, that we were never asked. And so now when we grow up, we have the power to choose differently and to actually ask ourselves the questions that we needed other people to ask us. We are now in control of asking ourselves these questions. And so why not do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%, which is why what you just said is going to tie perfectly well into this next question. We're going to talk about healing. What's the importance of healing an adoptee's past?
In my own healing journey, what I have discovered by now is that you need to stop denying what happened. And you need to really, really embrace everything that you feel, no matter how painful it is. It's not to say that you need to do it all at once, because that's impossible. We won't be able to do that. Then we will end up on a mental institution, I would guess.
Doesn't sound pleasant.
No, right? But I mean, what I have discovered is that our soul is so intelligent, and our body and soul, when they work together, they're so intelligent together. So when we begin healing, we will begin healing in the layers that we were traumatized, because we were not traumatized all at once. We were traumatized in layers. And because all the suppressed emotions, it's suppressed energy. So then we need to create this movement with the energy. Because I'm not sure if this is true, but I see emotions, if you look at the word, I see it as energy in motions, right? That's emotions. It means energy in emotions. That's how I like to see it, because that's what I experience. So I think it's really, to sit down and be so brutally honest with yourself and really embrace whatever you feel. And if you have a huge mother wound, primal wound, that some people call it, then we need to, cultivate self-love on steroids to make the pain, to starve the pain. I'm not sure if the pain will ever go 100% away, and I'm not sure if it's supposed to, because we can't undo that we were abandoned, you know what I mean? We can never undo that. We will always have to carry that experience within us. Our body will always remember it. Our soul will always remember it. Every second, like cell in our body will remember the day we were separated from our biological mother. And I know this because I had a birth recall memory around 1.5 years ago, I think, where I went back to the day I was born, and I was immediately separated from my mother, at the hospital. Like, I don't know, 1 hour later, I think, or something. That's what it says in my papers. And so be taken back to that day, I got to see it, from an adult point of view, how it felt like to the child in me to be taken from my mother, right? And to be separated from her. And it was like when they walked with me and left the hospital room, the nurses or whoever it was, I remember that every cell in my body, it was like they were activating this extreme alarm system. And they were like screaming, "I'm going to die now." And I remember I tried to tune into my mother's voice, and she was still in the hospital bed. I tried to tune into her voice, and I started screaming at her, hoping that, she would scream back to me. But she didn't. And it was that moment that I just realized, I'm going to die now, because if she's not going to come and get me, I won't survive. And so it's just to say that adoption affects people on a cellular level. I don't doubt it for a second. And I 100% trust that I was meant to be taken back to that day to understand it in like on a deeper level, right? So
No, that was great. I had a follow-up question. You were talking about when you taking yourself back to the moment you were born and that experience. What would you say to those who, for example, may have a different opinion that say, well, I was born, and adopted at 1 year old as a baby. I don't remember anything about my adoption.
Well, I didn't remember it either until 1.5 years ago, right? I didn't remember it. So, I mean...
Is there a practice that you think adoptees can learn to take themselves back, just like you figured out?
To be honest, I'm not sure that everyone is supposed to go back. I'm not sure that everyone's supposed to. Because I think that our soul chooses what we need to, see and experience in order to fully heal, right? And so I think that for some adoptees, if they go to like a regression therapist, like people who do this, and if they're not ready for that, if they're not ready to go back, I am so convinced that it can be even more traumatizing to be taken back, because you need to be ready to hold all the emotions that this experience will create, right? Because when I experienced it, it was highly unpleasant, but I was ready to experience it. I didn't collapse into the experience. I didn't collapse and felt overwhelmed by the emotions and the memories. And so I think that's the difference, that the journey of healing is so individual. It doesn't look the same for anyone. I have met a few other adoptees who also had a birth memory recall, and they were ready to go there, and it helped them so much in their healing process. But I can also imagine adoptees that I know that it would simply be too overwhelming for them, and it would be re-traumatizing. Because if you have never addressed your mother wound, your abandonment wound, the complex trauma around that, if you have never addressed that, imagine that you're being taken back to the actual day where it happened. How will you navigate through this box that will open wide?
Right. It's almost reliving it all over again. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that people need to really, really feel in with themselves, like feel what they really need. And if they are scared just by the thought of going back, then they should listen to that, But if they feel a calling from their soul that says, you need to go back and, see what happened, because you need to understand this and this and this, right, in order to heal, then trust that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about listening to yourself and listening to when you are mentally and physically fit and ready to make that journey. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Absolutely. How do you teach adoptees to set healthy boundaries?
Well, I used to always say that the first step is to learn where you end and other people begin, right? Because that's like for me, that's like the really fundamental of setting healthy boundaries. Because if you know where you end and other people begin, then you can so quickly see when other people are projecting their shadows onto you, right? Because I start here and you start over there, right? And if you can have a very strong sense of self, and if you can cultivating feeling very anchored in your body, then you just know when people begin this shadow shit. I'm so sorry to say it, and I have also been that person, so it's not to blame anyone, but when people begin this unconscious projection onto you, you have to remind yourself that you're allowed to say no, and that you are not a bad person for setting boundaries. You're actually helping the other person. You're actually, indirectly giving them an invitation to look at their shadows, because you actually give it back to them by setting this boundary and saying, I end here. I don't end over in your body, And so then, because we often feel so guilty and we feel like we're a bad person for setting boundaries, right? And especially if you grew up in a dysfunctional adoptive family. So that can be a really good reminder that you're actually inviting them to help themselves see their blind sides. But I wouldn't say that people should expect that they're going to see it, because that's their choice and that's their own business to solved, right?
Right.
But it's just something that you can say to comfort yourself when you might feel uncomfortable in the situation when you set a boundary towards other people. Right?
What if you try to set boundaries, but the other person isn't able to listen to that boundary or respect that boundary? When do you know it's time to stop trying?
I would say that there are some steps you can take, right, when setting boundaries. If you try to set a verbal boundary, right, by saying something like, I don't like this, I don't like you doing this, blah, blah, blah. And if they don't respect that, then it must have consequences, because that's you following up with the boundary, right? That's you maintaining the boundary, right? So when people don't respect the first time you set a boundary, the way you maintain the boundary is by saying, I'm really sorry that you don't respect my boundary. So now I have to do this in order to maintain my boundary, right? So let's use another example that might not be relevant to adoption. Well, I don't know, maybe if you're like, dating someone, right?
Yep.
That can also be relative for adoptees. But so let's say that you're dating someone, right? I guess adoptees are dating. I hope they are. So let's say that you're dating someone and that you find out, well, I don't want to continue this relationship, and then you tell them, and you went apart, and you don't talk anymore, and then suddenly the other person texts you and be like, oh, I miss you so much, can't we try again, please, 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 I'm so sad, I'm all alone here. Then you say, I don't want to continue communicating with you, please respect my needs, please respect my boundaries, that I said no, right? And so if they continue, let's say some weeks after, they reach out to you again and be like, are you sure you don't want to, talk with me? I really, really miss you. I think you're so amazing. You are the most amazing person I've ever met in my life. Okay, that's a huge red flag. But
I feel like we should have like a follow-up, like exclusive, like dating advice from you or something. That'd be funny.
And so now, some weeks ago, you had already made it very clear in your text message when they reached out to you, like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Please respect my decision and please respect my boundaries. So when they reach out to you for the third time, you don't say anything about, I don't, what you need. You just say, oh, well, I can choose what to say, but I like to be very direct, because with those type of people, it's not really gonna sink in unless you're like extremely, black and white with them. So then you can say, you didn't respect my first boundaries 2 weeks ago, so now it's gonna have consequences, which is I'm gonna block you.
Yep.
The end. And then you block them. And then it's like you block them on everywhere, like on every platform, phone, everything, right? Then you block them, because that's you maintaining the boundary. But I think that I remember the first time I had to do it with someone, I was so surprised, because I remember I was like thinking with myself, why did they not respect the first time I said no? And then for a split second, I forgot, like, well, now it's, my responsibility, to maintain the boundary. And I think maybe that's what we forget sometimes, because we actually get so surprised that people, they don't get it the first time. I mean, that's fucking odd, isn't it? Not that I have never been like that in my life.
Of course not, right?
The unconscious adoptee.
We're perfect.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the next step that you can, you can do to really, maintain these healthy boundaries. It's that it has to have consequences when people don't respect it. If they try to violate your boundaries, it must have consequences, and you choose what consequences it should have that will help you in that situation. Right?
What do you find to be the most common mistrust that adoptees face?
Within themselves or with the adoption industry?
Could be both. Whatever you'd like to talk about. Maybe let's talk about them first as individuals.
Yeah, I think the core issue for adoptees is that they were so disconnected from their soul in order to survive being adopted. And I mean, it can, it's a little bit individual for everyone, because I mean, some people are like 8, 9 years old when they're adopted, right? But then most of the time they had a very difficult childhood in their biological family, or if they were like foster families and all that stuff, right? So often it's not that healthy for them, right, what they experience. So I really think that's the core issue with trusting themselves. It is that they never built a solid foundation within themselves where they could lean into who they are and where they could trust who they are. And I think the younger you were when you were adopted, the more disconnected you were. Like, I really, 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 that's my experience personally and professionally. Yeah, I think sometimes it can, I'm going to be careful with my choice of words. I was going to say it can help people to be older when they're adopted, but only in the sense that they have then created some sort of language to articulate what they experience, right?
Right.
Only in that sense, I think it can be helpful. It can, maybe turn out to be helpful for them that they were a little older when they're adopted. Because when you were like, before you like learned, a language, you learned to speak, all that you experience will be so deeply buried in your cell's memories and in your body's memories, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you first have to begin creating a language for what your body remembers, but it can't tell you, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of like translate it. You have to like code what it is it's trying to tell you, right?
I have a pretty deep question. So this is a good one. If you have an adoptee that has a lot of pain and trauma in their life, how can they transform that into a positive future?
They have to meet themselves where they are right now. It doesn't matter how messed up you are. That doesn't mean that you can never have a brighter future, right? And that you can never transform your life. I think it's highly possible for so many people, 100%. I mean, of course, there is like, it's more difficult if you were diagnosed with a very severe mental illness, right? Then you will have to deal with that one way or the other, maybe for the rest of your life. But still, that doesn't mean that you can still have, that you can still transform your life into be better than it is right now, right?
Right.
Because, I mean, our soul is made to help us navigate, survive, and recover from whatever we experience while we are down on earth having human experiences. Our soul is designed to navigate through that. So no matter what it is that we want to do, whether it's to feel more like, to trust ourselves more, to transform our life, or to set better boundaries, or to like heal the past, the soul is the answer for that. Because it's no one knows what you need better than yourself. But if we were disconnected from our soul, then it's it's a little bit easier to ask it, right? Because we need to connect with it first in order to tune into what it is.
So, from a professional a professional stance, from your job and what you do as a psychologist, do you have any advice to adoptees who want to seek therapy, and the steps that it would take to find a good one if they want to seek specifically therapy on adoption, given you are a specialist in adoption?
I would say that if they find therapist, psychologist, or counselor, or what it is that they seek, I would reach out to them and ask them, what is your experiences and like knowledge about adoption? And if they say none, then I would move on to the next one. And it's not to ditch anyone and say that their high degrees doesn't matter, or it can't help them. But I remember when I began seeking therapy when I was in my late teenage years, the first therapist that I went to, they had no knowledge about adoption. And I soon discovered that that meant that they could not meet me where I needed to be met, because they did not have the right knowledge to meet me in that room, that adoption room.
Right.
And then I had to move on, and then I had to to find people who knew something about it. And not every psychologist, therapist, counselor, they write that on their website. Not all, they do it. I remember the last psychologist that I used some years ago, he actually did not have any specific knowledge in adoption, but there was, I still felt such a strong connection with him. And I later found out why, because in our last session, I ended my work with him, he actually revealed to me that he was also adopted. But and I was like, are you kidding me? I needed you to say that in the beginning, right? But that was his choice, his professional choice, and where he wanted to stand as a professional, and that he did not want to, to bring in the aspect that he was also adopted, right? He did not want to combine that with each other, but still the funny thing is he still used it, because he was still able to meet me where I needed to be met, without I understood or knew at that time why. So I don't think necessarily that the therapist or psychologist that people choose, they also have to be adopted. Because I have some colleagues here in Denmark who are not adopted, but they have literally dedicated their whole life to help adoptees. So they have so much knowledge and so much wisdom to support adoptees, and they are actually able to do it without being adopted. But I think it's because they put their soul into it, and that's a difference. They don't see it just as a job, that pay the bills.
Yeah.
They see it as their life purpose, and I think that's the difference. It's their calling. Yeah. So I think that's the advice I would give. You can also sit down before you reach out to anyone, and then sit down and, write a list of your dream therapist or dream psychologist, right? How do you want them to meet you? And, then you can reach out to someone that you find interesting, and then you can maybe, have some questions ready that you have written down. Yeah. But don't underestimate the fact that they should have some kind of knowledge or, to adoption. Yeah.
Wow. That was great. That's really gonna help people when they try to make that step, and for those who have been wondering how to, definitely. My final question for you: and this I like to ask everyone at the very end, is what advice would you like to pass on to our listeners and people who are trying to understand adoptees or adoption, or adoptees themselves who are listening? What advice would you like to pass on?
That was a big question.
Wow, you're the psychologist.
I would say, I don't know if it's gonna sound classy, but don't give up. Like, no matter what you're struggling with right now, just don't give up. It's just because you can't see it right now, the things that you want, or the healing that you wish to, to have, it doesn't mean that it's not gonna come. So you need to have so much faith within yourself that you didn't just come here on earth to suffer. That's not what the life on earth is only. You also came here to, experience joy, happiness, fall madly in love with someone, who's gonna be healthy for you. And
Next episode.
yeah, right. And you also came here to experience success and abundance, right? But I think that I don't know, I see this in my work, that oftentimes the souls that, the people who are adopted, who have these very, complex beginnings, their lives, it's often souls who are very, very intelligent. They're highly intelligent. The souls that chooses the most difficult and most painful, beginnings on earth. It's these souls, like, if people, like, if adoptees were sitting right now struggling, if they knew how fucking badass the soul is, it's like, when I begin meeting, like when I begin working with someone new, like a new client, and I tune in with their soul and I sense their soul's wisdom, it's like it gives me the chills every time. And even how much I try to explain to the person, how amazing they really are and how amazing their life is going to be, they're not there all the time. They're not ready all the time. And sometimes, they need a little bit more time to integrate everything that I say. But I think also part of my work on a soul level is to help people come home to their soul and unfold this wisdom, and to see that there's more to this life than just, the suffering from being adopted. Because, like, if we think about it, if this was really it, if there isn't more to this life than just this painful adoption story, why are we still here then? Why have we not put a gun to our head already? I know it's quite black and white, but if you think about it, there is something that keeps us going, isn't it? Something that makes us not give up, right? And that's what we want to tune in with. That's where the liberation is. And that's where the good life is. After this painful adoption experience. So I think that's the advice that I would give. That little voice inside that makes you keep going. Give it a microphone. Like, seriously, give it a microphone.
I think remind people at the end of the day just to stop for a minute and really think. and listen. I think that's the point we're trying to get across, is just listen. Well, Lockie, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure. You are full of wisdom and patience, especially being a psychologist, and we appreciate everything you're doing for the adoption community. And on a personal level, that was a very, very enjoyable conversation with you. I look forward to future ones, and I hope any news you want to share, if there's anything you want to maybe write a book one day, come on, join us, talk about it. We'd love to hear about it, and maybe have that follow-up on how to date.
That should be the next one. Yeah,
That'd be pretty funny. Yeah, adoptees dating. That's a good one. I'm actually I date a girl who's adopted as well. So
yeah,
boy, I have stories.
It went well.
Oh, it's going. It's still going.
Okay, amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, if some of the listeners speak Danish, I actually have published a book earlier this year about adoption. Yeah, about navigating the adult life as an adoptee. But it's in English. No, it's in Danish, unfortunately. Yeah. So you have to speak the language of hygge to be able to understand it.
I'll get going on that right away.
Yeah, right. Google Translate. Yeah, no, otherwise, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to future conversations with you. Folks, Lockie from Denmark, also as Theodora. You can check out our episode on voiceofadoptees.com and all of our podcast channels on Google, Amazon, and Spotify podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next episode. And remember, Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.